Okay, let's start with the vintage style trem. Chances are you might have a guitar that's got a vintage trem. Now there's certain things you've got to look out with them for. It's the tuning thing with the vintage style. They do work great, not like a Floyd Rose. So, I mean, you can get some kind of colour in your playing with the trem, but the main thing is how you have it set up. With all these systems, is how you have them set up. Now, all these vintage tremolos on these guitars are floating. All my tremolos are floating. Floating means that you have to have this block raised up from the body. Now, if you check my springs at the back, I've got two old springs here at an angle to create more tension. And the whole trick about getting a guitar floating, the actual system floating, is balancing the tension of the springs against the tension of the strings. This claw screws in and out of the guitar. As you screw the claw out, the tension of the strings will pull the actual bar up and the whole system up. So now it's floating from the body. Obviously, as you tune up, it can get more and more higher and higher. You have to kind of then balance the springs against the tension of the strings. So it's a question of finding that balancing point with this claw. Obviously, each time you tune your guitar to pitch, it's going to come back at a different point. So you have to keep it's a bit trial and error. You get a feel for it after a while, especially with the vintage ones. But I'm using 2 springs. Sometimes 3 springs is better. You get more tone with 3 springs, more resonance. But because I like a really light touch, I use 2 springs under tension. Because they're at an angle, there's more tension on them. So it's kind of softer than 3 springs, and it responds much easier. So once it's floating, once you've actually got it floating, the most you can expect float-wise on a vintage Strat is where you measure it is on the G string. You float to pull up, see how much you've got on a G string. So on that G string there, I'm pulling it up, and it's it's nearly 3 frets. So I've got, if I really yank it, I've got 3 fret pull up on the G string, which is great for a vintage system. Obviously, once you start doing that sort of thing, you're going to start getting tuning problems, or you can get tuning problems. Tuning problems on the vintage style trems usually occur in this area. It's either going to be your nut or your string windings. First of all, make sure your string windings are all super neat, one underneath the other, and not too many on each one. So as you wind the string on, it's got to sit, the winding has got to sit below each winding. So you know that there's not going to be any catching there. So you can't have it all kind of, all over the place. It's got to be actually embedded and neat. When you've wound the string on, you've got to pull the string. So even though these strings have been on a while, I bet I could pull this E string. If I give it a pull, like I'm really pulling the string to really bed it in on the actual tuning peg, and it's gone flat. And that's with strings that have been on these have been on for a week or so. So check that you've pulled the strings in more than you think you need to. So that's probably something you haven't thought about. Every time you change strings, whether you've got a tremolo system or not, pull the strings so they bed in. And even you'll find, even as you've been playing on it for a while, they'll still kind of slip a bit. But that's your first area to look at. You're actually tuning pegs. Got to be neat. They've got to be bedded in. The next thing you want to look at is the nut. Now, some guitars cater for certain gauge strings. I've got 9s to 42 on here, and this is a very old nut. It's been there forever, and I know that there's no slip. There's no kind of catching on the nut. What can happen is you can actually the string can stick in these slots. I've got a kind of a bit of a miracle cure, which was told to me by a guitar tech. It's some miracle stuff I've got just here. Now I've had this stuff for about 20 years. You don't need to use very much of it, but what it's called, it's like a silicone lubricant. It looks like Vaseline. It's like a little greasy gel type stuff. This stuff you can buy. It's super slippery. You can buy this from, well, I got this from a modelling shop. You know the guys that kind of have radio controlled cars? Well, they use this to lubricate the differential in their radio controlled cars. Hence it's called Pro Diff Lube. So all you need is a tiny little bit of this. With every string change, just put a tiny little bit in the nut, in the actual groove of the nut, and you'll find that the string slips over the nut a lot easier. So that's going to eliminate kind of sticking at the nut. It's a real cool little quick cure. Obviously, if the cut of your nut is a complete mess, then it's best to change the nut and get a kind of a guy, a man, a luthier to kind of work his magic on it. But chances are it's fine, and it just just needs a little bit of bedding in, or a little bit of kind of grease on the nut. Not too much, just a tiny little bit. The old school of doing it was using graphite from a pencil. Very soft pencil. Every string change, just rub the graphite from the lead of the pencil in the nut, and that has the same kind of effect. Hence you can get graphite nuts to actually kind of get rid of that problem. So check that out. It's called Diff Lube. It's a miracle cure, and you get it from model shops. And I've had this for 20 years. That's how little you need. It's so slippery. But wherever the string touches metal, for instance, at that string guide there, I would stick a little bit underneath there as well, because sometimes, don't forget, the top E and B string are going to be moving on that string guide just there. So you need a little bit there. Wherever it kind of touches, wherever the string touches something, put some Diff Lube, and it will kind of slip over as you're kind of doing the whammy bar. The next thing you need to look for is no play on the arm. Now, it's very responsive. I can put the arm where I want. Now, I know a lot of kind of guys, they can get it there and it's too loose and it kind of slips like that, and then when they try and tighten it up more, it reaches about there and then it won't go any further. You don't want to over tighten your tremolo arm, because it will just not do the arm any good, or the block that's in there. But I've got a miracle cure for that. Now this kind of sits just right around about there, and it's just luck of the draw that this kind of, it feels kind of just right. But if there's knocking and play on your arm, there's another miracle cure, which is this stuff. This is what plumbers use. This is called PTFE tape. It's a little kind of some kind of rubbery tape, and you need about that much screwed onto the actual screw-in part of the arm. So if the camera can actually follow me, I'm actually going to kind of take this arm off, and I might have some on this arm, I can't remember, but I think this arm fits kind of cool and tight. Right, so you can see the thread there. There's no tape on that at all. Generally I kind of keep the arms on the guitar when I'm putting them away in the case. So once this stuff's on, it will last for a while. You don't need a lot. If we just take that there, I'm kind of just getting a little bit on there. What's that, about 3 inches? And then we just wind that round like that. See that, wind it round. Just at the end there, give it a little slip like that. So now as you wind this bar into the actual block, the tape takes up that extra play that you had. Okay, I'm just turning it now, and now I'm just it's getting gripping right there, is where it's now kind of really seated nicely. The tape has taken up any extra play that I had. This fitted quite well, but this will work on any bar that's got a kind of play. You want to put the bar just kind of, be able to move it and it stays there. You don't want it flopping around, and you don't want any kind of clunking as you're moving the bar, because once it's amplified, that comes out through the amp. So now as I kind of, it's really responsive, and you need that response to get the actual kind of subtlety in the playing. So 2 miracle cures, the Diff Lube and the PTFE tape will get your kind of vintage trem kind of up and running for starters. The next thing, the last thing to look at, which is kind of more difficult to kind of think about, you may have to take it to a guy to set it up, set your guitar up, but if you check these screws just here, there's 6 screws attaching the tremolo to the body. Generally, when it's floating, you really only want the outer 2 screws really kind of sort of holding it in place. The middle 4, you want to back off a bit. You want to loosen a bit more, so they're kind of they're not interfering with the actual pitch of the bar, pitch of the block, and it's only these outer screws really holding it in place. And you don't want those screwed right down. You want those backed off slightly. So imagine that you're trying to imitate a freestanding post that's on the modern trems with these outer 2 screws. So the middle 4 screws aren't really doing a lot. They're backed off, you know, obviously not kind of hanging out. You know, you still want them in there because you don't want the whole bar kind of falling off your guitar, and you don't want to just all the strain put on these 2 outer posts. But the middle 4 backed off more than the outer 2, so that really the friction is only being felt on the outer 2 posts. But if you've got that kind of, if you've got your strings set up kind of embedded and nicely wound on the guitar, if there's no catching on the nut, and these kind of screws are set up nicely, there's no reason why this guitar, a vintage style trem, can't actually kind of do some wild stuff. Still in tune.